If it wasn't for pity, no one would have invited you. My father said into the microphone, glass of champagne in hand, 175 guests within earshot. At my own father's company milestone gala, I hadn't spoken to my family in 12 years. When the invitation arrived, handwritten, tucked inside a plain envelope with no return address, I knew this wasn't just a celebration. It was a trial. My name is Jenna Brooks. I am 32 years old. My father had just branded me the family disgrace in front of everyone, and my stepmother sat there in silent agreement, her smile tight. That public rejection cut deeper than any storm surge I had ever faced. That moment sparked something irreversible. Before I go on, please like and subscribe if this kind of family betrayal hits close to home. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, and I drove my 8-year-old sedan through the Miami night air, thick with salt and distant thunder. 12 years ago, I had stood on the front porch of our Coral Gables home with one suitcase and less than $2,000 in savings. My father had placed the suitcase there deliberately after I announced I was accepting an officer commission in the Coast Guard instead of joining the family insurance business. "You made your choice," he told me that afternoon. Those words still rang louder than any rotor blade I had ever flown under. My mother passed when I was 17 after a long illness. My father married Patricia 2 years later, and she quickly made it clear I was the stepdaughter who never quite fit the mold. Tonight was supposed to be my father's victory lap, his retirement gala at the exclusive Bayside Club, with 175 of his closest business associates, neighbors, and what remained of our family. I parked in the overflow lot and walked in alone. The welcome board showed family photos spanning decades, but my face had been edited out entirely. The year they chose for the company founding was the year I was born, yet I was missing from every picture. My table assignment was number 19, pushed against the kitchen doors with artificial flowers that looked faded next to the fresh orchids on the head table. I took a glass of Pinot Noir from a passing tray and tried to stay invisible, but the whispers started immediately. My father spotted me within 15 minutes. He crossed the floor with that familiar commanding stride, holding a glass of aged bourbon. I didn't realize the guest list included charity cases. He announced loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the 12 years, just that immediate strike. I set my glass down steadily. "Hello, Father. Congratulations on the retirement." He leaned closer, voice dropping but still carrying. "If you embarrass this family tonight, you will regret it. Your older sister has her trust fund, her Brickell condo, and half the costs of this gala all running through me. Test that if you dare." My stepmother Patricia materialized at his side right on cue, wearing a shimmering silver gown and a practiced sympathetic expression. "Oh, Jenna, how unexpected," she said. "I told Robert, someone must have mixed up the invitation list with the charity donations." She then guided me physically toward a cluster of guests near the terrace doors. "Everyone, this is Robert's other daughter. She left the family years ago to— What is it you do again, dear?" "Something with boats." I answered calmly that I was a commander in the United States Coast Guard, leading search and rescue operations out of the Miami Air Station. The group offered thin smiles and quickly turned away. In my father's circle, contradicting Patricia meant contradicting him. My uncle George Brooks joined them shortly after, his face already flushed from drinks. Uncle George had always backed my father without question. "Some people just don't appreciate what they have been given," he said pointedly, looking straight at me. "The rest of us built something real instead of playing hero in helicopters." His words landed like a deliberate jab because they repeated exactly what my father had drilled into me growing up. I kept my breathing, even drawing on years of training where one wrong move in turbulence could cost lives. The same principle applied here on dry land. My cousin Sophie King pulled me aside near the bar a little while later. She had always been the quiet observer at family gatherings. "I always suspected there was more to why you left," she whispered urgently. "Your older sister has been planning something for months. Just stay no matter what Father says. Trust me." Her words left me unsettled with questions I could not voice yet. What exactly had my older sister been planning all this time before I could press her? The lights dimmed slightly, and the MC called everyone to their seats for dinner. I found table 19 with four strangers who already seemed familiar with the family narrative my father had spent years spreading. My father stood at the head table and raised his glass. My older daughter has always understood loyalty. He began, voice warm and rehearsed. She never threw away opportunities to chase unrealistic dreams. Several heads turned toward my corner. He was painting the picture again, the daughter who failed the one who did not measure up. My hand stayed steady on my wine glass, but inside the old wound mixed with fresh resolve. The courses arrived and left. My stepmother brought over Christopher Scott, my father's longtime business partner, along with his wife, Sarah. Christopher looked me up and down. Coast Guard, huh? Good for you. Someone has to do the grunt work while the rest of us build actual value. He laughed along with my father and Uncle George, who had joined them. What do they even pay you? Probably less than I spend on one good dinner. The mockery felt coordinated, a campaign to remind the room of my supposed place. My cousin Sophie watched from a nearby table with visible concern. Uncle George added another sharp remark. The real world runs on balance sheets, not salutes. I took another sip and said nothing, but the air grew thicker with tension. A woman I recognized as Elena Vargas, an old family friend who helped plan these events, leaned over during the salad course. I was on that boat trip years ago, she murmured so only I could hear. I saw what happened out on the water. Your older sister knows too. Something is coming. Her words sent a chill through me. The boat trip 5 years ago had nearly taken my older sister from us all. I had never spoken of it publicly, but clearly the truth was no longer buried. Just as dessert plates were being cleared, my older sister stood up and moved toward the stage. The room quieted. My father smiled expectantly, assuming some tribute was headed his way. But the look on my older sister's face told me this was the moment she and my cousin had hinted at. Whatever came next would change everything in this ballroom. My older sister reached the microphone just as the band faded out. The spotlight caught her elegant navy gown like scattered starlight across the ballroom floor. The room quieted completely. Forks paused mid-air, and my father leaned back in his chair with that satisfied smile of a man expecting tribute from his loyal daughter. But the look on my older sister's face was pure resolve, not gratitude toward him. She gripped the mic and began speaking in a steady voice that carried to every corner of the Bayside Club. Most daughters thank their parents for raising them, my older sister said. But tonight, I need to honor someone who made this entire day possible, someone my family tried to erase. A murmur rippled through the 175 guests. My father straightened his tie, still smiling, but with a flicker of uncertainty creeping in. My older sister looked straight across the room until her eyes locked on mine at table 19. I want to honor my younger sister, she continued. 5 years ago, I was on a boating trip off the Miami coast with friends when a sudden storm capsized the vessel. I was trapped underwater for 9 minutes, lungs filling no pulse when they pulled me to the surface. A Coast Guard rescue helicopter was dispatched, but the pilot did not wait for the dive team. She jumped into the churning waves herself in 43-degree water in the dark. She pulled me out with her own hands and performed CPR on the rocking deck until I started breathing again. The ballroom went dead silent. My stepmother's hand tightened on my father's arm. My father stared at my older sister, his face turning the color of old paper. I had no pulse for nearly 2 minutes, my older sister said, voice cracking but strong. That pilot saved my life. For 4 years, I did not know who she was because the Coast Guard protected the pilot's identity for operational security. But I filed the right requests and got the report. The pilot was Commander Jenna Brooks, my sister. The gasp moved through the room like a wave. Heads turned toward me. My Uncle George muttered something under his breath, but my cousin Sophie stood first, eyes wide with respect. My father stood halfway up, clearing his throat sharply to interrupt. This is hardly the place for fairy tales, he said, voice carrying that boardroom authority he always used to shut things down. But my older sister kept the mic. My father kicked out the woman who saved my life, she said, and for 12 years, she never said a word about it. She kept serving, kept flying, kept saving people. 189 confirmed rescues at last count. She is the youngest woman to command a Coast Guard rescue wing in this region, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Humanitarian Service Medal. My older sister lifted a printed page with the official Coast Guard seal, visible even from the back tables. She looked straight at me and raised her right hand in a salute. To Commander Jenna Brooks, the bravest person I know and the best sister I could ever have. The salute was imperfect, a civilian's attempt, but it hit like a thunderclap. I stood slowly, chair scraping, silence. Then my cousin Sophie pushed back her chair and rose. Then Lieutenant Marcus Hale, my old co-pilot who happened to be a guest that night because he knew my older sister through shared friends, stood next with a textbook salute. The applause started with one pair of hands and spread like fire. People stood one by one until the entire room was on its feet. My father stood in the middle of it, like a man caught in a riptide, his face chalk white. My stepmother tried to lean toward the nearest guest with a shaky smile. My father always supported Jenna in his own way, she said, but nobody turned. My uncle George shifted uncomfortably while my father's business partner, Christopher Scott, gripped his glass tighter, face flushing red from more than just the bourbon. The social physics of the room had flipped in 90 seconds. People who had avoided me during cocktails now drifted toward table 19. Elena Vargas, the old family friend who had whispered to me earlier, pressed my hand and said she had suspected the truth all along. My cousin Sophie introduced me to Jeffrey Parker, another associate from my father's circle who had been watching quietly. General, he said, we've been looking for someone with real operational experience for our Veterans Foundation. Would you consider an honorary role? I nodded, honored, but the moment felt fragile because my father was still standing there surrounded by applause he had not earned. Then Christopher Scott's glass slipped from his hand. It shattered on the marble floor and his hand flew to his chest. His face drained from red to gray in a single breath. His knees buckled. He collapsed sideways, pulling the tablecloth with him and sending a centerpiece crashing down. Sarah Scott screamed. The room erupted into chaos. Chairs scraped, guests shouted, a waiter called for the manager. I was already moving, crossing 20 feet of floor, before my conscious mind finished processing what my training had already identified. Male in his 60s, acute chest clutch, loss of consciousness, probable cardiac arrest. I dropped to my knees beside Christopher Scott, tilted his head back, checked his airway, put 2 fingers on his carotid. Nothing. No pulse, no breath. Somebody call 911 now. I called in command register, not the voice of a forgotten daughter. The voice of a woman who had spent 12 years pulling people from the worst moments of their lives. I positioned my hands, locked my elbows, started compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted aloud, hitting the sternum at 110 beats per minute. Is there an automated external defibrillator in this building? A staff member sprinted toward the lobby. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The man who had mocked the Coast Guard less than an hour ago had no pulse, and the only thing between him and death was a pair of military-trained hands. The automated external defibrillator arrived. I tore open the pads, placed them on his chest. Clear. Shock. His body jerked. The monitor beeped once, then flatlined. Still nothing. I did not hesitate. 30 more compressions, 2 more breaths. The crowd formed a wide circle, silent now, panic replaced by helpless stillness. I repositioned the pads. Check the rhythm. Ventricular fibrillation. Shockable. Clear. I hit the button. Christopher Scott's chest rose and fell with the jolt. Beep, beep, beep. Sinus rhythm. Weak but present. He coughed a wet, ragged sound and his eyelids fluttered. I rolled him onto his side into recovery position and placed my hand on his shoulder to keep him stable. Stay still, I told him. You are okay. Paramedics are coming. The room was absolutely silent. 175 people, not a single sound except the beep of the automated external defibrillator monitor and Christopher Scott's labored breathing. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes after the 911 call. 2 emergency medical technicians and a medic with a stretcher. They assessed Christopher Scott, quickly, vital, stabilizing, consciousness returning. The lead paramedic looked at me kneeling on the marble in my simple dress hands still positioned for compressions. Whoever started that response saved this man's life. Textbook. He paused. Are you a medical professional, advanced cardiac life support certified Coast Guard training? He nodded the way professionals nod at other professionals. They loaded Christopher Scott onto the stretcher. As they lifted him, he turned his head. His eyes found mine. The man who had spent the evening calling my career grunt work was looking at the woman who had just restarted his heart. His face crumpled. "I am sorry," he whispered. His voice was barely there. "For what I said, I am so sorry." My stepmother stood beside the stretcher, mascara streaking. She looked at me. The contempt was gone. My father stood 5 feet away, arms at his sides, mouth open. 12 years of narrative gone in 6 minutes of compressions. "Do not apologize," I told Christopher Scott. "Just breathe. That is all that matters right now." The paramedics wheeled him out through the service entrance. The ballroom lights seemed brighter now, or maybe I was just seeing more clearly. My dress had a crease at the knee from kneeling. My hands were still warm from the effort. My older sister appeared at my side and held out the microphone. I shook my head once. She pressed it into my hand and whispered, "Please." I looked at the mic. "I did not come here tonight for recognition," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "I came because my older sister invited me. I have spent 12 years serving people I have never met, pulling them from water and wreckage. I would have served my family too if they had let me." I found my father in the crowd. He had not moved from his spot near the head table. His bourbon sat untouched. His suit looked too large for him suddenly. "Father, I forgive you," I said, "not because you asked, but because I need to. Carrying resentment does not suit me. It never did. But I want you to understand something. I did not fail. I chose differently. And that choice has saved 189 lives, including your daughter's." I set the microphone on the nearest table and did not linger. "I do not need your approval to know my worth," I added, without the mic, just my voice in the quiet room. "But I do hope for my older sister's sake that one day you learn to measure people by what they give, not what they owe you." The ovation was louder this time, longer. My father stood in the center of it, surrounded by applause, and did not clap once. What happens when 175 people recalibrate at the same time is quiet. It is a shift in foot traffic. The direction people drift when they are choosing who to talk to. They drifted toward table 19. A woman from the planning committee pressed my hand and said she had no idea. A couple from my father's church told me their son had served in the Navy. A teenager asked if I had really jumped into storm waves, and for the first time all night I laughed. Lieutenant Marcus Hale introduced me to another veteran across the room. The social physics had inverted, but my father was not finished. He crossed the floor with that same commanding stride, pulling me aside onto the terrace before I could slip away. The October Miami air hit my face clean and sharp with salt. He stood beside me at the stone railing, looking out at the dark lawn. "I was wrong," he said after a long silence. 3 words, 20 seconds of quiet before them. He said them stiffly, as if each syllable cost him something he had been hoarding, but then his jaw tightened and the old tone returned. "Still, you cannot expect this family to rewrite 12 years of history because of one night. Your older sister has her trust fund, her condo, half this gala. All of it runs through me. You want to test how far that goes?" He paused, letting the math settle like he always did. "Stay quiet about tonight, or the invitation to any future family event disappears permanently. Choose Jenna, the family image or the spotlight you seem to crave." His eyes held the same certainty that he was right about everything always. The man had not changed in 12 years. He had just grown more expensive. My cousin Sophie watched from the doorway, concern etched on her face. My Uncle George lingered nearby, ready to back him up. The ultimatum hung in the air like a timed fuse. Stay silent and keep the fragile peace, or speak, and watch the last door to my family slam shut forever. I felt the weight of it press against my chest, the kind of choice that leaves no winners, only survivors. I looked my father straight in the eye on that terrace, the Miami night air thick with salt, and the distant hum of traffic from the causeway. 12 years of silence had come down to this single moment, and his ultimatum still echoed between us. Stay quiet about everything that had just happened inside the ballroom, or lose any chance at future family events, any connection to my older sister Isabella, any thread that still tied me to the Brooks name. He waited, confident as always that money and control would bend me the way they had bent everyone else in his life. "My father," I said quietly, "you do not get to rewrite what happened tonight. I saved Christopher Scott because it was the right thing to do. The same way I saved Isabella 5 years ago when no one else could. That is not a secret I will bury to protect your image." His jaw tightened, the same expression he had worn the day he placed my suitcase on the porch and told me I had made my choice. "You always were the difficult one," he replied, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Your older sister Isabella has her trust fund, her Brickell condo, half the costs of this entire gala. All of it runs through me. Test that boundary, and you will find out exactly how alone you can be." My stepmother Patricia stepped out onto the terrace, then her silver gown catching the low lights, followed closely by my Uncle George Brooks and my cousin Sophie King. Patricia placed a hand on his arm the way she always did when reinforcing his decisions. "Robert is only thinking of the family reputation," she said, her tone laced with that familiar false sympathy. "We cannot have you turning every gathering into a spectacle about your Coast Guard heroics." Uncle George nodded, his face still flushed. "Some people need to learn gratitude instead of demanding attention." My cousin Sophie looked torn, her eyes pleading with me to find a middle ground, but she stayed silent because she knew better than to challenge him directly. Even my older sister Isabella and her husband Tyler Evans joined us moments later, drawn by the tension. Isabella reached for my hand. "Jenna, please," she whispered. "We can work through this as a family." But my father raised one finger, the gesture that had always ended every argument in our house. "No, this ends tonight. Either you agree to keep silent about the rescue, the salute, everything, or you walk away for good. No more invitations, no more calls. The trust fund support I have quietly extended to you over the years stops immediately." Tyler Evans shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing, his loyalty clearly with his new father-in-law. The choice was mine, and it felt like standing at the edge of a storm surge with no helicopter coming to pull me back. I took a slow breath, the same 4-second inhale I used in the cockpit when waves threatened to swallow everything. "Father, I choose myself. I will not stay silent. The truth is already out there in that room, and I will not carry the weight of your shame anymore." The words landed heavy. My stepmother Patricia gasped softly. Uncle George muttered something about ungrateful daughters. My cousin Sophie King pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with the realization that this was the breaking point. My older sister Isabella started to speak, but my father cut her off with one look. "Then you are no longer part of this family," he said flatly. "Effective immediately. Do not expect any further contact." He turned and walked back inside without another word, Patricia and Uncle George following like shadows. Tyler Evans gave me a brief, regretful nod before trailing after them. My older sister Isabella lingered for one more moment, tears in her eyes. "I am so sorry, Jenna. I thought tonight would fix things. It only made them worse." She hugged me quickly, then hurried after her husband, leaving me alone on the terrace with my cousin Sophie King and the retired Colonel David King, who had stepped out quietly with his wife Anna King. Colonel David King placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Commander, that took real courage. You did the right thing." His wife Anna King added softly, "We have seen men like your father before. They never change until they lose everything, and sometimes not even then." My cousin Sophie King squeezed my hand. "I will try to talk to him, but I think the door is closed. Call me if you need anything." She slipped back inside, and suddenly the terrace felt vast and empty. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite goodbyes and awkward well wishes from guests who no longer knew how to place me. Jeffrey Parker from the Veterans Foundation confirmed the honorary role offer, but it felt hollow against the finality of my father's words. Brittany Ruiz, the maid of honor who had helped Isabella prepare the speech, found me near the valet stand and whispered that she had never expected it to end this way. Elena Vargas, the old family friend, simply hugged me without speaking her eyes, saying what no one else would. I drove home alone through the Miami streets, the 8-year-old sedan humming under me, the weight of permanent exile settling into my chest like cold seawater. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family was absolute. No calls, no texts. My older sister Isabella tried once, but my father had changed the family group chat and blocked my number from every shared account. The trust fund support I had never asked for, but sometimes relied on in quiet moments, vanished overnight. I moved into a smaller apartment near the air station, took on extra shifts to cover the gap, and watched my savings dwindle while my commanding officer praised my steady performance in the rescue wing. 189 lives saved, yet the one family I had tried to keep felt further away than ever. Colonel David King and his wife Anna King invited me to a small veterans gathering a month later where Lieutenant Marcus Hale and Jeffrey Parker spoke openly about the night at the gala. They offered real support, the kind that did not come with strings or ultimatums. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet, the regret crept in. I had chosen self-respect over connection, and the price was total isolation. My father remained exactly where he had always been, powerful, surrounded by my older sister Isabella, my stepmother Patricia, Uncle George Brooks, and everyone who still measured worth by balance sheets and loyalty oaths. He had lost nothing. I had lost the last fragile thread to the only family I had ever known. Some choices do not come with clean victories or satisfying revenge. They come with empty chairs at holidays and unanswered messages that eventually stop being sent. I still fly rescue missions. I still jump when the call comes. But the heartbeats I count now include my own beating steady in a life I built alone. That night at the gala taught me that saving others is easier than saving the version of yourself your father refuses to see. And sometimes the bravest thing is simply walking away, knowing you will never be invited back. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever faced a choice between family loyalty and your own truth, and the cost left you standing alone, drop your experience in the comments. I read every one,